Sometimes, just the necessity of the situation forces you to make a big leap. I saw this as almost a one-off opportunity to start a business and to be part of growing it for myself. I started out, did 4 or 5 years in one of the large firms here, which was fantastic. You actually don't need that many clients or that many successes to make a real go of it. You've only got one client. And, how risky is that? If I told you I was starting up a law firm and I was only going to have one client, you go, that's crazy, man.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. The good thing about having a fairly young podcast is you get to have a lot of firsts. And today is another first for me in this podcast. It's our first guest from Australia. So excited about this one. So we've got Josh Watts all the way from Australia, and it's early in the morning there and in the afternoon here. So we made it work. But Josh, thanks for coming on, man. So we got a lot to talk about, but why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us, I think you're in Sydney.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your firm and what you guys do, and then we will dive in.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having us. Yeah, so my firm's name is Run It by Legal. We're a small boutique firm that focuses on commercial clients, all business-to-business clients. And we operate out of Sydney, Australia. So quite a ways away from where you guys are. But it's amazing the power of the internet. And I've been listening to your podcast for a little while now and really enjoyed them. So I thought I'd reach out and give it a different perspective, because there's a lot of overlap and similarity and the journey of sort of starting a firm and going through those issues that, everyone sort of goes through. And then there's probably a few differences as well. So I thought it might be interesting to the audience.
Yeah. So, let's talk about your firm. So I know you started it in, 2021, but before that, you were not practicing law.
Yeah.
At all, were you?
Yeah.
So let's talk about what you were doing before you started your firm.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is one of these unusual things. I think it's sort of a bit of a point of difference for where my firm now sits, because I spent a large portion of my career outside of law, not actually practicing. I maintained my practicing certificate throughout, which was a very useful thing to do, and maybe a tip for people who've moved out of practice. I'm not sure if it works the same way in the States, but maintaining those sort of CLE points or those training points and keeping up your practicing certificate in the back drawer is always a handy move and has come really good for me. But I've spent a large portion of time as a general manager at one of the large telcos here, moved into commercial. My original practice was at Big Law. So I started out, did 4 or 5 years in one of the large firms here, which was fantastic, great training. And I know we talk about that often, but realized that I really liked the business side of things. And the way some of the big firms were going, particularly around that 2000 time, they were really leaning into people becoming specialists and really specializing down narrow paths once you got sort of past senior associate level. And for me, the lawyers that I'd worked with, the partners I'd worked with, the people I admire the most in the business, were the lawyers that businesses just wanted to call. They're the ones that they trusted, they wanted as part of your business. And these guys have made their way up through a very different path. They'd been really good generalist lawyers. And what the firms were offering was just not that path anymore. I saw it becoming very narrow. I had those discussions with the partners that I liked, and they were like, yeah, you're right. This is not what we did 10, 15 years ago is not what's on offer anymore in the big firms. So that drove me to moving to in-house counsel at our large telco provider, Telstra here, which is a significant sized telco. And I did in-house work there, working on their large business and government deals for quite a while. But I always wanted to move closer to the business. So I moved out of a legal role there, started running their national contracts team, and then moved into the commercial deal making side and spent a fair bit of time on the deal side, moved across to Canon, which is, the big Japanese company, and started up some of their business divisions around managed print services and outsourcing. So always complex contracting arrangements and deals. So I was still involved in that and negotiating those deals and close to the contracts, but not doing legal work and not providing legal advice in that time. And it actually ended up with me taking over and being COO and running one of the companies that we bought there, which is an IT managed services business, and doing that for 5 years, which I really loved. Really loved growing a smaller business into a more mature one and having success in that space. And really, that probably set up my profile in the industry, in the IT and tech industry in Australia as well. Which is what, when I came out of that role, I had to think and think about, am I looking for another executive role? There are plenty of executives with legal experience in my experience, but there are very few lawyers with executive experience and business experience, having run those sort of companies and been through the growth and the sales and understanding how customers and delivery works. So for me, it was like, let's give this thing a shot. Let's see if it really is a point of difference. It's funny how you start these things out. I did a bit of research. I looked around and thought, are people actually niching into this market? Does this actually work? Can you make a living out of it? I Googled up who the firms were that were doing similar things, and I rang around. I rang up one of the founders in the local area and who had similar experience, but was sort of 10 years ahead. And I rang him and said, hey, can I buy your coffee? Can we talk? And, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Can you make a living out of this? He was encouraging and sort of proved that you could. And so, 2021, difficult time to launch a law firm with no book of clients.
Yeah. Well, let's stop for a second because I want to go back and ask a couple questions. So let's talk about your big law experience. I know what big law is like here in the States. I'm curious if it's similar down there. So, here in the States, you're working your ass off. I mean, some people say it's 2 or 3 jobs or 2.5 jobs. I mean, you are working. Is it like that down there? Or is it a little better lifestyle? I know down there you guys like to go to the beach and surf and hang out. So
no, unfortunately, well, definitely in my time anyway, it was definitely the same thing. It was definitely the hard graft. Look, some people went more into it than others, to be sure, but I think in some ways it's a bit of rite of passage in there. In other ways, it is also character building. I mean, I remember distinctly pushing back pretty hard after having worked an overnight shift and then being in the office, since the day before. When it got to about 10 o'clock that night, saying, okay, that's it. I'm going home to get some sleep and come back, and being told, oh, that's not good. I'm like, hello, you weren't there last night at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was negotiating this deal. So yeah, it is still a bit like that. I think there is still a lot of pressure, but I guess there are other factors in the workplace now too that have come in, particularly post-COVID, that have sort of broken some of those pressures and modes of operating.
Yeah, it's it might be good and bad. So I mean, the with the iPhones and the Blackberries and the emails, you're always in contact, and now, quote, work from home, you're always on the clock, right?
That's right.
Or at least theoretically. So, okay, so then you moved in-house and you did that for a while. So I'm real interested too about how, moving from the legal role in-house to an actual business role. And I've worked in-house, and I know plenty of others that have. And, it's interesting talking, my own experience and talking to others, at a law firm, you're a profit center as a lawyer. In a company, you're a cost, you're an expense. They don't treat legal necessarily as they do some of the other divisions. So I guess, what was your experience in legal, and then how were you able to transition out of that?
Yeah, good questions. And I do see that quite often. I must say, my experience, there was a fairly strong presence of a legal team in Telstra when I moved in there, and a fairly senior team that was quite embedded with the business. So in some ways, although, in-house legal is always seen as a bit of a roadblock and can be seen as slowing things down, there was a reasonable acceptance that the team was fairly savvy and fairly business focused in trying to get things done. So we did a lot of stuff in-house. We didn't brief a lot, and we turned things around fairly quickly, which the business sort of engaged with. But there is always that tension. And a lot of it, I think, came down to relationships. So really understanding those people that you're supporting and trying to sort of educate them on what the benefit is for their deal, how you can make things quicker and easier and are a better alternative, even if it's a better, worse alternative than having to do something different. So I see it all the time, exactly what you're talking about. I see people in very difficult situations and really throwing a lot of work and a lot of pressure without much support or thanks. And I do see that a lot in some in-house counsel roles. Luckily, that wasn't my experience, but yeah, I see it a lot. And then transitioning to business is, again, relationships. I mean, it's really developing those relationships with the people that are going to help you and support you and sponsor your move into the business.
So when you moved, was it like a lateral move, or because you probably worked up to a certain point on the legal department, did you have to then step back to move over to the business role, or was it sort of a lateral?
It was a lateral move. I guess I had to get a bit of an audit on what I needed to update in my skill set to really move across to a senior role. So I deliberately saw that there was sort of a gap in managing large-scale teams and people. So I deliberately took on opportunities on the legal side where I could to get and prove that experience, so that enabled me to move across more laterally in the business into a role where I did have 60 people underneath me, because it wasn't going from no reports or no team management experience to jumping into that role. So that's sort of an example of how I tried to move across laterally. But it's not easy. It does take some time and planning and working with the right people.
Okay, so you moved over to the business role, and then you moved across different businesses. You ended up in a COO role, which it's really cool. I mean, I love business, and I know there are some lawyers out there that would sound completely ideal. Move out of the law and just move into business. Easier said than done. It is easier said than done, and so kudos to you to making it happen. So you did all that, and then let's move up to your firm now. So
Sure.
Then in 2021, you decided to start your firm. So again, that was sort of, I think you were alluding to, sort of in the wake of COVID a little bit. So, what was that like? You also mentioned you had no clients.
Yeah.
So it had to be scary. I mean, do you have kids? I mean, do you have family?
Yeah, I do.
You go from steady job to, all right, I'm doing my own thing, and we're in COVID, and I don't have any clients, guys. This is going to be great.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was lucky enough at the point where sometimes just the necessity of the situation forces you to make a big leap, and I think I was in that lucky situation where I financially I'd come out reasonably well from my last role. There had been money around through COVID for people to move on, which was good. And it gave me a little bit of time. So it wasn't a sort of burning bridge. The market was really almost forced my hand, in the sense that there were no new executive roles, new things in the market straight out of coming out. So it did give me some time to sit there and think, well, I need to ride this one out if that's the path I'm going down. But I'd always helped other businesses grow. And I'd always had in the back of my mind that I would like to be part of leading a business that I had a big stake in. And I saw this as sort of almost a one-off opportunity to do it. I mean, a very, very distinct divergence of paths that I could see in front of me. And one was really doubling down and going down that executive role, which would have really narrowed me into more corporates for the rest of my career, really. And really, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So I saw this as almost a one-off opportunity to start a business and to be part of growing it for myself. So I sort of jumped on it then. In terms of having no clients, what I did have was a good network in the target area that I wanted to practice in, and the area where I thought I was going to add the most value. So I never sort of started a general practice law firm. I never wanted to do any type of law that came through the door. I really only wanted to do that transactional business to business, contractual deal setup, negotiation side of things, and really being the in-house counsel for multiple clients. And that's really what framed it for me. And then when I looked at the contacts I had, they were the type of clients that I needed to target. And thankfully, with a bit of graft, I reasonably quickly picked up a few clients to get going.
So I want to go down that path, but before we do, I want to circle back to sort of COVID.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was COVID like down there? What were the lockdowns? You know, I remember hearing about New Zealand just locked everything down. I don't recall, or maybe I never knew what it was like in Australia. So maybe paint that picture for us.
Sure. And in some ways, you know, I knew that question was going to come up, and I feel like I blocked part of it out in my mind because it was so bad here. We, particularly in Victoria, the southern state, the largest sort of southern state with Melbourne as the capital, they had massive lockdowns. I mean, they were locked down for, I think, at least 6 months of a year, and lockdown here, and we were locked down in two different periods, and one for almost 3 months. And lockdown here meant you really couldn't leave your house. You had to have a reason for leaving your house, and you're allowed to leave once a day for exercise, and it had to be within I think it was a 5 kilometer radius of your house. And so you could be stopped and checked.
Wow.
You know, there was no interstate travel. It was a full lockdown, and it lasted for, you know, a long periods of time.
So if you had family that lived, no. 2 states over,
no chance.
You couldn't go visit.
No. And they closed the borders as well, right? So people who were out of the country really struggled to get back in. They had some sort of repatriation flights where you'd have to fly in and go into quarantine for 2 weeks in quarantine hotels before you could get back to your home. So it was a very uncertain time, but also, you know, just, you know, you couldn't believe what happened unless you lived through it.
That's wild. You know, I'm here in Georgia, and we had some lockdowns, but they opened it up fairly quickly compared to, you know, other parts of the states here. And so we were spoiled a little bit. It was still weird. No school, you know, that kind of stuff, or home, whatever. So there's some weird stuff. But okay, so that's the backdrop there. It sounds like severe lockdowns. Did you start your firm in the middle of the lockdowns, or had they ended by the time you started?
I started my firm about a month before one of our most serious lockdowns.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know,
So what was that like? Yeah. What was that like?
Well, I think it's one of those things. We all had a mindset. It was just, you just keep going and you keep pushing. And without the technology that we had, you know, if that had have happened 5 years before, you just would not have been able to run business the way business kept operating. I think we're very, very lucky with the timing that meant that we could have these interactions, because there is no substitute for sort of seeing somebody and connecting. And I still think that the personal meeting is still really important, but there's a lot you can do. As you know, there is a lot you can do reaching out to people around the world now where you weren't able to do it before. So it was just, wasn't ideal, but it was about pushing through. And I think businesses had the mentality as well that this was the way it was going to operate. There was a bit more trust given to take on new people. Luckily, I'd met most of the clients before in different roles. So we had that personal relationship. And then it was a bit, you know, you still needed to prove and sell and make the sale and move ahead with all online.
So yeah, that's really interesting. You're in the middle. Luckily, you had these business connections, and I'm sure they're very valuable connections, and you had the business experience, so you can sort of speak the business language. Probably gives your potential clients a lot of comfort. They're sort of talking to one of their own.
Yeah.
So take me through. You started reaching out to your connections, and you started landing some clients in the middle of this COVID stuff, and I guess that has gained some steam, and so your firm's up and running now. Tell me about sort of the structure of your firm. Is it just you? Do you have help?
Yeah.
Is it all virtual?
Yeah, I've been through a few iterations, and I guess I could talk to those, but where I've landed now is working with experienced lawyers that are either solo practitioners or have their own small firms. And I've sort of sought out people with the right sort of mentality, background, experience to provide the same sort of service that I'm providing to my clients. So I've got a network of them. There's 3 or 4 lawyers in that network that I'm currently briefing work to and bringing in under my banner, under the Run It by Legal banner to clients. So I'm doing it that way rather than hiring full-time resource. I've been to market a couple of times to hire, I'd probably talk about the experience with juniors. So I have hired juniors and had junior lawyers on. Unfortunately, for the type of work that I do, I found that it was counterproductive in the sense that there are very few things that are the same and very few repeatable processes in the work that I do. Yeah, you're reviewing contracts all day and the same issues come up, but your ability to spot them, they're sitting differently in every different deal and every different contract, and everyone's got a nuance in terms of what they want. So I was finding it was very difficult to give a junior sort of a first pass of a contract, and they're difficult contracts, they're 80, 100-page contracts, they're complex things going on. For me, I look at them and it's just like I read them every day. But for a junior person, that's difficult. It takes a lot of time, and then you get it, and I've got to read the contract line by line anyway. So the time that it was saving versus the time to build juniors up and to work through that just wasn't cost effective at the scale that I'm working on. So and there was no reflection on the juniors either, because they were great. But I really moved to a model of what I need in the business is people to do my work, so that I can then focus on the business, focus on the clients, and continue to grow, and also do those pieces of work that I really need to do. So that's sort of where I've got to. When I went to market to hire employees in that senior space, for the type of work that I'm doing, I found that the people that had gone out or set up their own thing or come out of something else probably had a better fit and mentality than people who wanted to be an employee, and to substitute a previous employment role. And it was just funny. I never sort of predicted that, but the people I came across who I thought, yes, you're a good fit for my clients, tended to be ones who had started off their thing on the side or set something else up and wanted some flexibility or some ownership. I was like, yeah, I understand. I understand that's why it fits. So I've sort of created this model. There are others in the market that are doing it. I'm not sure if it's a big thing in the States, but I know there was a large firm in the UK that did this model with consulting principles. It's a key point. They actually floated in the UK. So they're on the exchange there, and they've got a similar company down here. And there are a few others as well. So taking advantage of the incorporated legal practices that we now have.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand this. So you've got you and your firm, and then you have found other attorneys that you sort of contract with to basically do all your work. How do you find those attorneys?
Yeah, good question. I guess it's just being in part of networks where you think you're going to come across these people. I'm probably the biggest social media channel or media channel for me, given the type of work I do, is LinkedIn. So that's where I spend most of my time and profile. So I do come across people and have people reach out through that channel. I've got a fairly large network of people and friends of friends who I can see worked in different places. Sometimes those larger in-house teams, like the Telstra in-house team, really, I've got a great network of people that I used to work with there that some that I do work for, and others that have gone through the training of that sort of ground and have come out as really good lawyers to deal with. So it's never easy. There's never enough. Hold out an ad. Anybody interested, please get in touch. Because it's always the challenge. You're either trying to find more clients or you're trying to find more people to help do the work.
That is one of the challenges of I'll call them contract attorneys. So let me back up. Are they only working for you, or do they have their own gig also? So they're doing some for you and then some for themselves.
Yeah, at the moment they're doing some for themselves as well. Yeah.
And it's just, I have found, and I've used contract attorneys, but, sometimes there's only so much time they can give,
sure.
And you have so much work. You're like you just said, you need more of them.
Yeah.
You're like, all right, let me find some more. And, I think it's a challenge here. I'm sure it's a challenge there is finding enough good people.
Absolutely.
To help.
Absolutely. I know. And it's across the board as well. I'm in some scaling groups with a lot of lawyers from the family law side, and they just seem to be completely flat out and cannot find resources. I mean, it's sort of ironic because there are more lawyers in Australia probably than anywhere else per capita. I think we've got over 90,000 lawyers. I remember even back when I was at law school, they used to say, Australia's got more lawyers per capita than anywhere except California. And in the last 10 years, that number's doubled by over 50%. So, I'm sure we've probably got more than anyone, but it's just not coming through in terms of the supply and demand and getting, the right lawyers to do the work.
That's interesting. So I read an article, I don't know, well, it was a tweet thread yesterday or the day before, talking about in the U.S., the law firm applications are starting to go up, and they're pointing to it as a recession indicator. Because the last time that happened, it was like the recession was coming because people didn't have jobs. They're like, screw it, I'll go to law school.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it sounds like a pretty sophisticated practice. You need people that have experience. So they've got to have been out there and done it. And they're probably hard to find, I would imagine.
Yeah, they are. But it's, I think it's one of those things too that you only need so much to be successful. And what success is for one lawyer or one founder is going to be different to somebody else. I'm driven to make this something, reasonably substantial, and do have those larger goals. But it actually doesn't take much. And I think it's difficult when you come out of a paid and employed role for a long time. And particularly if you don't have role models or other people that have done it, it's hard to see how, you get to the level of a salary or any sort of safety net. And I think that's one of the hardest things for people coming out of it. But you actually, depending on the type of law you do, you actually don't need that many clients or that many successes to make a real go of it. I remember going out, particularly people saying to me when I went out and set this thing up, it was obviously seen as a much riskier thing than being an executive in a corporate. And people were saying to me, gosh, how are you going to set up this business? You're relying on, only a few clients. And my response to that is, as an employee, you've only got one client. And, how risky is that? If I told you I was starting up a law firm and I was only going to have one client, you go, that's crazy, man. You've got to spread your risk. And I think with less and less loyalty in employed roles, you need to be careful that you realize that you actually only have one client. And you need to think about that, because I've seen a lot of people get burned.
That is so true. I mean, I've thought about it in the sense of, a lot of big firm lawyers will say, oh, I can't leave. It's too secure where I am. It's too risky to leave. And sometimes it's too risky to stay because you may be at the mercy of your firm. But I've never even thought about it in terms of being an employee of a company. It's like that. It could really be risky. And at least if you start your own thing, like you say, you can spread your risk out amongst lots of different clients. And if you keep your overhead low, it doesn't take all that much. I mean, you got to have some clients, but it doesn't take all that much to make a go of it, which I'm sure you found out fairly quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it isn't all smooth sailing. I don't want to give the impression that, 4 years has just been a trajectory. It absolutely hasn't been. And I know we were talking before about some of the sort of the traps and the things that you can get, some of the mistakes you might have made along the way. And for me, one of the biggest mistakes was getting too comfortable. I was surprised at going okay early on, got myself a really good retainer and a few good clients, substituted a reasonable salary, and then took my foot off the pedal. And I'm pretty, you work with a lot of founders, you probably see this, and got a bit complacent with where I was going. It started to default into more of an employee role, mode, where you just, do what comes across your desk, get stuff done, get paid, and forget that you are running a business. You are trying to substitute work coming in. You do need to grow, and all of those seeds that you plant in the marketing and the networking in these businesses take time to grow and come off. So you need to do that work 6 months, 12 months out to see the fruition of it down the track. So that was complacency was definitely an issue for me in that period. And I guess born by a little bit of success, right? I'm sure I would have scrapped harder if I hadn't have done okay early on. So, that was really a plateau. And I look back on that as probably a wasted year or two in the journey. But then, everything else, it's hard to go back. You can't go backwards, right? You just got to say you are where you are. But for people listening, if they start to feel like they've got that, they're too comfortable, it might be the sooner you get onto that, the better, because stuff takes time.
I think that's a really good point. And, you almost have to go through it to learn the lesson.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you can hear it, you're like, I hear it, but you almost have to go through it and really embed the lesson. But the other thing is, a good healthy dose of fear, I think you all need it. And, you don't want to be overcome by fear. It can be too big, but you need a little bit, you need something to drive you, or else, you sort of fall into that trap you mentioned. But So before we got on, you mentioned you operate under an incorporated legal
Hmm.
practice. Maybe explain what that is. I'm not sure what that means.
Yeah, it may actually be quite similar to the States. But so previously in Australia, being any sort of firm revolved around individuals. So you, in your individual capacity, either as an individual or as a partnership of individuals. So there was no incorporation, there was no company that could be the legal practice. There was no corporate veil, and there was no protection as an entity. That changed in 2001 in New South Wales, and then some other states followed as well, where you could actually incorporate as a company. There are restrictions on it though, so there still needs to be an Australian solicitor that's a director of the company and responsible, like effectively the responsible person for the entity in the eyes of the law society and to allow you to continue to practice, to get the practicing certificate for the company. So I've taken that path of being incorporated, which allows you to have those corporate structures as well. It allows a company to own the IP, trademarks, a company to employ people, as opposed to and what most people will do here in Australia is have a sole practice where you don't need to be incorporated. You run that as a sole practitioner. You can still employ people under that model, but you just don't have the protection of the corporate entity. Yeah, so it's reasonably new. It's I say 2001 doesn't sound new, but it hasn't had huge take up yet. But I think we're going to see a lot more of it.
Okay, so you have a company, you have to have a lawyer or
Yeah,
solicitor be responsible for it. Can you have non-lawyers also be owners in that company?
you can, you can, and you can.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah. There are also multidisciplinary, so it is possible too to run non-legal divisions or work out of that entity as well.
okay, so that's cool. So that is sort of starting to happen in the
Right.
states. So in DC, they've allowed a version of that for a good number of years. But Arizona, I don't know if you hear about it down there, but Arizona has opened it up, sort of like what you just described. So you have to have a lawyer that's licensed that's responsible for it, but you can open it up to non-lawyers to own it, and so that is sort of really picking up steam, which maybe leads me to a topic that I really wanted to make sure we covered. And, I've known that Australia, along with maybe UK and others, have publicly listed, publicly traded law firms. So here in the States right now, it's the big deal. Other states going to allow non-lawyers to own a part of a law firm. Nowhere on the radar is, hey, we're going to list this on the stock exchange, which you guys have been doing for some period of
Yeah.
time. So I'm really interested in that. So what is that like down there? I don't know if you were, when it came about, and were you really paying attention to it when it came about? Was there a big debate about it, or, sort of take me through that?
Yeah, it wasn't as big a news as you might think it would be. I mean, I'll caveat that with there's some obvious conflict issues. So the companies that have listed on the stock exchange here, there are a few. The largest two are personal injury firms and reasonable size personal injury firms. None of the top tier or large firms or general practice firms I've seen even entertain it, largely because they make enough money as partnerships. I'm not sure that they want to give up any equity. There's usually more of a fight for people to try and get equity in those firms than to try and get more equity holders in. But those firms, there was obviously some talk about it at the time when they launched and when they IPO'd into the market. And there was some debate, obviously, around the legal area, around adding another conflict issue to the duties that the director has. You've obviously, as a lawyer, your primary duty is to the court and to the justice system, and then next to your client. Adding the layer of what your obligations to shareholders are and to public shareholders really just adds one more level of potential conflict that I can see in that, and tension in that. But we haven't seen anything really come out of that. We haven't really seen, nothing's blown up around that where there's a conflict between acting in the interest of the shareholders and acting in the interest of a client, for example. We haven't seen that happen. It's really just been an operating model in the background. I'm sure within those firms, it's I'm sure it's changed the way things operate within those firms where people are given publicly traded shares. They'll still all have the same restrictions, in being able to trade their shares and locking them up and locking them in. So it won't create the nirvana of liquidity that you might think it does for a partner. But yeah, it really there's sort of happened and it's died down, and I don't see a rush to the market to list anytime soon for any of the other firms.
You mentioned conflicts, and in my mind, I'm thinking, so you've got a big personal injury firm that is listed on a public exchange, and then you get a big insurance company that's paying out all these personal injury claims, and they say, "Oh, we're going to go buy up this firm," and so then they're on both sides of it, right? So that would be a weird. I don't even know what you would do with that.
Yeah. I mean, and in some ways that happens because the biggest investors in our market are really the superannuation companies. So we have a large superannuation scheme here, which is sort of like a compulsory pension scheme. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it basically, there's a percentage of everybody's salary that goes every month, every pay into your super account. And you can't really touch it until your pension age or 65. And so this massive pool of funds goes into these superannuation companies, and then they invest that at your direction, but largely into the market. So they end up being massive players. And the superannuation companies also generally provide the life insurance, death insurance, the third-party injury, lots of different types of insurance, income insurance. So as you say, these providers that are the front line of insurance also do hold large stakes in these companies. Yeah,
it's just crazy.
But
but let's go.
They're always going to win. So they're going to, even if they lose, they're winning through the law firm.
That's right. That's right. I mean, if you can do anything, own an insurance company. Ask Warren Buffett, right? Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So let's go back to your firm. So you mentioned it's the incorporated legal, so you can also offer sort of these multidisciplinary services, so non-legal services. So is that anything you're exploring with your firm?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, my view is always to really niche down and understand the needs of the target market that you're in. So what I'm looking at is any ancillary service that would support that target market. And for me, one of the things that I see a need for is the company secretary, registered office services, incorporation services that sort of sometimes fall between legal and accounting. And they're not strictly legal services, but I can definitely see, that's an area that I've got a meeting later today to start to set that up. So this is an area that I think we'll move into, because it's an adjacency that supports the same clients. That means that they can stay within, in-house within the firm, and we can help them. I've sort of done that a little bit with the legal services. I've, recently moved much more into employment law for employers with the support of other lawyers that I'm bringing in to help with that. So this is just the next step to that, moving out to the other things that sit alongside it. Yeah, you've already got the relationship, you've got the trust. It's about then seeing what other services make sense in that relationship.
And I would imagine those types of services, at least some of them, are more apt to be able to be scaled, to be pushed down to less experienced people, maybe non-lawyers, all that. So it allows you to grow in a way that perhaps you can't with lawyers.
Absolutely. So, that's a good point. That's a good point. It also gives you the ability to focus a little bit more on annuity revenue. So, which if you're close to business, that's what people like in terms of value of a business, that allows you to sort of provide services that are ongoing and, charged on a monthly or annual basis.
So I want to get into sort of what you do for marketing, but before I do, I want to sort of do a side topic again that's not really law related, but it's Australia related. It's Australia related.
Awesome.
I'll follow some people in financial circles or whatever. So I've become aware of this. This is not a big topic in the U.S. No one talks about it, but I'm just sort of aware of it. Since I got you, I want to ask you about it. So the housing costs in Australia, I have heard, are just insane, crazy, bubble of all bubbles, just crazy stuff going on down there. And I was just curious, from somebody that's down there in it, what's your perspective?
Well, like Australians are house and housing market obsessed. Like it's the number one. If you go to a barbecue or a braai, whatever, you're going to be, that's the first thing people are going to be talking about. The housing market, the housing prices, that ranks way above politics or anything else in this country. And because so many people are in the market moves so strongly. There are lots of mortgages. So everybody is focused on house prices. And we've seen massive, massive growth in house prices. Some supply and demand issue, but also lots of foreign investment coming in as well. So we have a lot of immigration, or a lot of people buying up properties, particularly from Asia, as Asia's started to boom. The amount of money that's come in has been crazy. So, I mean, to give you an idea, like in the 70s, when my parents would have bought a house, you were looking at a house of maybe 2.5 times salary to buy a house. Now you're looking at 14 times.
Whoa.
So, the median house price here in Sydney is around $1.5 million. And that's everywhere. So now getting to the point where they're calling it a housing crisis, in the sense that the next generation's ability to purchase a house, even a unit, is really stretched, and there are constraints on building that are, we're just not building enough new properties and have new space to build to meet the demand. So it's in the news all the time. It's talked about. Obviously, it's where you sit on it. It does depend on whether you own a house or not. So there's a lot of talk about how do we stop house prices increasing. But for most people, a house is their biggest asset and is the source of their biggest wealth. So you've got this real tension down here. But yeah, it's like the prices are crazy, and I wouldn't want to be entering the market now.
We have similar stuff going on here. It depends on the submarket for sure. Here, one of the problems here is there's not a whole lot of inventory, and the prices are high, and the interest rates are high, so people can't afford. It's just the affordability is an issue, but there's not enough housing, and they're not building enough. So that's a similar issue. If they built a bunch, bring the prices down, I'm sure. So it's a weird thing. So I was just interested, since I got you, I wanted to hear.
Yeah. So, don't worry. When you come down here and you get off the plane, I'm sure the taxi driver to your hotel will start telling you about house prices.
It's not like that here. No one's really talking about it like down there, but that's interesting. All right, so let's shift back to the law firm. So you're marketing. So what sorts of things do you do, and what works for you down there for marketing? I know you had a lot of connections from your business life, and I'm sure that's part of it. But, what sorts of things, you mentioned LinkedIn too, that works here, but what's your approach to marketing down there?
Yeah, it really, again, I guess you've got to start with identifying who your real ideal client is and what market that you really serve and your niche, and not be too broad. I think this is a difficult thing I see with most people who start out. They're like, yeah, we do everything. We can do your will, we can do your M&A transaction, we can do a licensing agreement. Yeah, great. But it makes your approach to the market really, really scattergun, and you're trying to appeal to everyone. For me, it's a little bit easier because I've really narrowed it down to I'm only targeting companies. So I'm really only targeting founders and executives of companies who are making a purchasing decision on legal, and general counsels who have overflow work in the areas that I'm an expert in, and we provide expertise. So that really narrows your target market down. And then once you've done that, so that for me, that understanding and that piece has to happen before you talk about any channel and any way you go to market. There's no point in starting with Google ads and then doing that piece of work. You need to really know who you're targeting. And for business to business, I haven't done a lot of testing in it, so I can't say for sure. But I think those large scale advertising campaigns, and even the semi-targeted ones, I'm not 100% sure that that's going to bring much. And SEO, I'm not sure that is even a major thing, unless you happen to be the top one or two in your space for business. For me, it's much more targeted. So it's lists out of LinkedIn, or lists, or using other list platforms to really narrow down and target who are these people individually that I'm looking for. There might be 25,000 companies that I'm a good fit for, or we'd be a good legal provider for, right? And then that's a finite list. And then how do you work that down? Where do you target that list? How do you go, okay, well, of that list, who's in the general location that we can get to easily? Who can we meet? Narrowing those lists down, and then running a campaign, there's different software that you can use to help you run these campaigns, but ultimately you need to tailor them fairly tightly yourself. And that's so I would, yeah.
So you've got your list,
Yep.
you got your target
Yep.
list, and you mentioned the campaign. What does that look like? I mean, are you emailing them? Are you calling them? Are you sending them letters? I
Yeah.
mean,
So
what does that look
yeah,
like?
I mean there are some fairly strict rules here around anti-spam, and I'm not sure what they're like in the States as well. So there has to be some sort of nexus and at least implicit consent to email campaigns. So you do need to be careful with those, but where you do have direct consent or at least implied consent with opt-out rights, you are able to do email campaigns. So I have tried use those through software like Apollo and others. And where I've found the biggest success, though, is multiple step processes through a LinkedIn campaign where you're got your target, you then effectively do the research on those people. You're going through, you're looking at what they're posting, you're commenting. A period of time later, you make a connection, and then I've actually found what I personally hate when you click connect on someone and then a message comes straight up and so they're trying to sell you something straight away. So for me,
Oh yeah.
I try and avoid those pop-up messages. So I just let people connect, and then I might leave it a month. I might like something they've done, but then I'll have a pool of people that I've connected with over a month, and then then I'll do a sort of a 3-step. I'll come out to them and go, okay, sorry, this month's been crazy. I realize we connected. I'm not sure if you know what we do. This is what we do. What do you do? Where are you? Like, do you want to catch up? Yeah, you already know. Like, these are pre-qualified people, right? You know that they would be 50-50 a good conversation for you to have in your business. So it's worth like putting it out there to go like, let's meet for coffee. Where are you? Like, how can we help each other with business? How can we collaborate? And just sort of like a 2 or 3 step in that, you're only going to get, a conversion rate out of that of 5% or something is a good result. And if that in the type of work that I do, where you become their trusted advisor for legal work, this is not like a one-off deal. This could be $1,000 piece of work, but it means that you're their go-to person for the next 5 years for everything that comes up in their business. So it's worth the time. It's a very different approach to market if you're doing a conveyance or you're doing something where you're really churning and burning through a number of clients. So that's why I say you really need to understand who your market is first and what you offer, and then pick the right approach for it. I see people sort of going, we need to do marketing now, and they get a list of what people do to market, and some of them are just not relevant to the type of work that you're doing and the market that you're doing. I think the way I approach things would be the wrong approach, where you've got lower value multiple churn. It's way too intensive to get the result that you need. So I think in that case, the Google ads and those things do make sense.
That's interesting. I've in the past I've sort of talked about it. To get clients, you can hunt, which is sort of what you do. It's hunting. You can fish. You can plant seeds, and then for your former clients, I call it mining. Yeah. So you're mining your old clients. So you have more of a hunt.
And I guess I was just focusing on the hunting there, but I love the way you phrase that and the analogy, because I think it's perfect, because you have to do all of those things.
Yeah.
Because they deliver at different speeds and different value. So you're mining the existing customer base and clients. I mean, it's the easiest market, and it's one that we probably most often forget to do properly and relentlessly and be top of mind for those clients. So staying top of mind for those clients is really critical, and it's one of the things I struggle with the most, and it's on my to-do list to make sure that we're getting those newsletters out, we're being more top of mind with clients. It's hard to do when you're busy, but you've just got to do it if you want to keep that momentum going. So that's I've just taken on board a new paralegal who's going to assist with that, which is great. And then there's also the brand awareness and the business awareness piece, and just being a trusted advisor or an expert in the market, which is very much what you're doing with this sort of podcast and forum. And it's funny, I've heard you mention videos before too, and I had a similar issue for the last couple of years, where I know that the way I consume content and meet new people online is to watch their 30-second, 2-minute video, right? And I know it, and I've known it for years. And every year on my marketing plan, I write there, got to get those videos done. You got to get those videos done. You've got the technology to do it. You can do it.
Yeah.
Never did it. And so this year I was just so mad with myself in January. I went to write it down again. I'm like, no, this is ridiculous. I just picked up the phone, looked on a website and said, I'm not going to do this myself. So I'm going to pay someone to make this happen, to force me to do it. So that's what I did. So I've recently just launched some videos. I hate videos of myself. So you've just got to get over that, I think.
Yeah.
But,
welcome to the club. Yeah. Well, that's the exact same thing. I've had that on my list forever and ever. I mean, I do these podcast videos, but finally I said, all right, I have to pay somebody because if I'm writing a check, I will do it then.
Exactly.
I will do it then. So,
that's exactly.
So I am talking to people right now.
Just
I'm
do
in
it.
the process of the last couple of weeks.
Make it someone else's deliverable, and it'll start to happen.
It's coming. Well, cool. So I got a couple more questions before we wrap up. So I'm curious also about the licensing down there. So here in the States, each state has their own licensing body for the lawyers, and you have to have a license in those states to practice. And once you take the bar exam, some states it's easy to sort of wave in if you check certain boxes. But, there's not a countrywide license that you can just use everywhere. So I'm curious, in Australia, is it the same? Is it wherever you live, you can practice all over the country, or is it state by state down there?
Yeah, it largely is that you can practice across the country. There are some exceptions, and there are some exceptions by subject where some things are just really different. So, I wouldn't be doing property law or something in Queensland. There are just different regulations, different ways of doing things. So people will stick to their states. Some of the courts, you need to ask for leave to appear, but it's regularly granted. But other than that, you can practice across different states. You can have clients in the different jurisdictions. Yeah. So it is a little bit less strict than in the States.
That's cool. Okay, so another question. So your firm, you've got a trade name, run it by legal. Are trade names common down there, or is it still traditional? We're listing everybody's name. What's it like down there?
Look, it's still very traditional. Like most firms are still under people's names or trade names. I think it really depends on the market for me. You'll see, I guess a lot of smaller ones are starting to use other names and trade names as they're coming through. I think it's a bit of a generational shift. So we're seeing more and more people coming out with, aspirational names rather than using their own name.
That's interesting. These sorts of things interest me. But so we've been going a long time, and I want to be respectful, but I want to know, this question I like to ask folks is, you've been at it for a little while now. You've been in business. Now you've got your own business. What's your vision for your firm over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I'm really at that scale point where I can see us growing and serving a lot more clients. I think the market is really there and really ripe for disruption in that mid-market growing company. I think we're really offering something that isn't offered by the larger firms and isn't well serviced necessarily by individuals. So I think we're able to offer something different in the market. So I see no reason why we can't scale this up. The challenges are really finding the people. But I'm also seeing that a lot of good people are leaving by choice or through redundancy out of larger firms. So I think there's a massive opportunity for harnessing great lawyers between the age of sort of 45 and 60 or older who still want to work and still want to contribute, but aren't seen as valuable as they are in the organizations that they're in. I think there's a lot of value there, a lot of people who we can tap into on both sides. So I think scale for the firm is the next thing. I think we talked about it before, offering other and ancillary services. And I'm spending a fair bit of time with an international lens as well. So I've joined an international group, Lawyers Europe International, who are now all around the world. They've been going for since the 90s. So I'm representing them in the Australian market and doing more work with them. It's a collaboration of over 800 lawyers worldwide that sort of work collaboratively together that are outside of big practice area, and also doing more things internationally where I think there's customers trying to get into the Australian market as well. I see a lot of opportunity there. So I think there's a lot of upside and growth for the firm.
Well, that's cool, Josh. I appreciate you coming on. This has been really interesting for me. I've learned a lot because I know about Australia, but I don't know much about it. So this has been fun. For anybody out there that wants to get in touch with you, I don't know how many people in Australia listen to this, but for anybody anywhere in the world that wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
Yeah, look, LinkedIn is probably the best thing. So Josh Watts, Run It by Legal, you'll be able to find me there. You can easily set up a meeting or reach out, connect on LinkedIn. That'd be great.
Awesome. Well, this has been fun. If you're ever in the States, ever in Atlanta, a lot of people flying to Atlanta. So let me know, man. We'll grab a bite.
The Masters is definitely on the bucket list. So it'll happen.
It's coming up. It's almost here.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty out there. It's pretty. So yeah, you need to make that. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, cool.
Great.
We'll appreciate it.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.lawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.